Today is May 28th, Wednesday, May 28th, 2025, and we are talking today with Anita Carrasco and Grace McIlrath. Did I say your last name correct,
It's
Grace?
McIlrath.
McIlrath. Pardon me. Mil McAlfer. Oh, I can't even say it now. We're talking with Anita and Grace from Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, and they are the authors of a book entitled Invisible Battles of Ordinary Moms. Okay. This is KHOI 89.1 Storty City, Ames, and you're listening to I Am Able, Iowa, where we discuss the ability and disability. I'm your host today, Nancy Baker Curtis, board president of the Arc of Iowa, school teacher, and parent advocate. Our co-host for today is Doug Cunningham, executive director of the Arc of Iowa. Today, we're going to be discussing what it's like to take your lived experiences with disability and to create a work that will help to empower others. Please welcome our guests, Anita Carrasco and Grace. Can you help me out, Grace?
McIlrath.
McIlrath from Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, and they are the authors of the book Invisible Battles of Ordinary Moms. Thank you so much for being on the radio show today. I want to welcome you both. And to start off, I was just hoping that you could introduce yourselves and share a little bit about what drew you personally and professionally to the topic of disability advocacy in Iowa. And Anita, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, first and foremost, I'm the mother of a boy who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at the age of 7. But before a diagnosis, it was a long journey of seeing things that were different, language delays, all kinds of developmental delays, normal quote unquote milestones that didn't happen. A lot of just being in the dark. And once we confirm as parents, that begins like a journey, right? A journey of looking for answers, finding ways to help my own child thrive in a world that was not designed for people with disabilities, right? And so I think that would be the first exposure that I have really with the world of disability. And in terms of expanding and doing things for individuals beyond my son, I would mention the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute that I was able to participate in 2021, where they led a group of moms like me with children with different disabilities into crafting a community project to advance the rights of disability beyond the needs of your own child. So this is when it really became a community problem for me more than my own personal problem.
And Grace.
Yeah, I was born into it. My brother, who's older than I am, he has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So from the moment I was born, I was emerged in this world that I didn't realize was different from the rest of the world. And so it was kind of this slow process of realizing that there's something strange about my family and that what I experienced wasn't what is typically expected of the family. And then, Anita approached me in college about doing a research project, and I was like, sure, I'll do that. Sounds like fun.
That's so interesting to me because I personally identify with both aspects of what you say. I identify as a former Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute participant and mom of a disabled child, but I also see so much of what Grace talks about in the experiences of my own daughter, who is the older sibling of her disabled little brother. So I'm so grateful to you both for being here, and I'm so excited to share this story and your journey to creating this beautiful piece of work, Invisible Battles of Ordinary Moms. Your title itself is just so powerful. And how did you decide upon this title, and what does the phrase mean to you, and how did it emerge during your research and writing process?
I can start. I think I correct me if I'm wrong, Grace. I think I came up with the title.
It's your title, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I want to make sure I don't steal anybody's credit. So I came up with that title because I think, I couldn't imagine a better metaphor for disability advocacy led by women as the war metaphor. And so it's like ongoing battles. And one thing that I was, had exposure to in the workshop that I did with the leadership training was that I wasn't alone, that it was an army. It wasn't just me fighting for my son. There were countless of women fighting all kinds of battles that no one really knew about, and hence the invisible aspect. And I also put in air quotes ordinary moms, because these are just regular women like you and I, housewife, mom, not famous, not rich, right? And there's nothing ordinary about them at the same time. And so it just felt truthful to the experience that I witnessed, getting to know the other moms in the workshop, that made me realize that it was an army. It was just not just me. So I think, it just made sense as a title. It felt representative.
Grace and Anita, how did you two end up working together on this?
So Grace said, already shared a little bit about that. But I remember the first day I met Grace. So I still have an image, a clear image of when I met her. She enrolled as a first-year student in a January term course titled The Culture of Capitalism. So we discussed a lot about inequality of the economic system in that class. And I think the very first week during that class, there was a discussion brought up by one of the students about questioning the word exploitation and maybe thinking about reframing or rethinking it as utilization. And it wasn't really exploitation. And you should have seen Grace. Thrive and get up and defend, her point about, how it, as a matter of fact, it was exploitation. And she came up with like a very elaborate, list of arguments. She was very impressive for a first-year student. And I didn't know then, but later when we developed the relationship, she disclosed to me that she had a brother with a disability. And as an anthropologist, lived experience is very important for me to be able to connect with the people you're going to learn from. And so I was going to do this project, and I needed someone to help me, which was something they taught me at the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute. You have to learn to ask for help. You can't do these things alone. And it felt perfect, a smart student that had lived experience that could come along with me on this journey. So I think that's how I would explain.
Grace, and how about you? I'm sure, having a brother that has disabilities and that's a normal environment for you, this was probably a unique ask. And so you had a very unique perspective. How did you feel about starting a project like this?
I mean, I was being an academically interested person, I was very excited about it. But I was also very hesitant because I realized I would be diving into aspects of my life that I don't necessarily talk about or kind of keep to myself. And so I was realizing that in order to do this work, you have to be very reflective and think about your own experiences as they relate to the other experiences of the people you're talking to. And so I was like, there was no question in my mind that I wanted to join the project. It was just a question of how am I going to join the project mentally?
It almost sounds like a therapy session.
Yeah. Except you're like both therapist and therapy person receiving the therapy at the same time.
So it sounds like you both had a point of reference but yet you started collecting stories about other moms. What did you find out? And were you surprised by any of the stories that came along?
I was always surprised at how open and very gracious too, but the women were all very open about their stories. They would tell us things. And I thought if I were in that chair, that's not what I would be saying because I'm a very guarded person. But I was very grateful for what they shared and kind of just the power of speaking words aloud and speaking these experiences aloud that aren't necessarily allowed to be. There's kind of a taboo against saying some of the stuff or even talking about the stuff because people don't understand. So it was a lot of cathartic kind of
Can you give
conversation.
us an example in the book of where you address that? Either one, and both of you feel free to speak if it.
I can, like I think part of the openness of the moms came from the connection with the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute. They were all alumnus, so they knew that I had gone through the same training that they did, but they also knew that both Grace and I had lived experience with disability. So I wasn't so much surprised with how open they were and how ready to be vulnerable they were because they kind of trusted us before they met us,
Sure.
almost. Uh, However, I I I was surprised at kind of going back to Grace's point of being guarded and not being sure how to handle the emotional aspect around doing this kind of work, where we were with no warning given. Maybe sitting in an interview, one of the interviews that I remember where we both had tears rolling down our cheeks because a mom disclosed the death of one of their children. And it came like kind of sort of there was a buildup, but you weren't sure that this is where they were going. And suddenly this is where they were going, and just crying with them. And crying almost in every interview. And then, as Grace said, kind of not expecting, not going in the project for this reason, but getting about 2,000 hours worth of therapy in the process. And so that was very surprising. How it was, I wasn't expecting that we would cry so much. And I don't know why I wasn't expecting that we would cry so much. It's now that I think about it backwards, that was obviously probably very predictable or expected, but we held each other in those interviews. And you can imagine I'm a professor and Grace is also my student. And so imagine all the barriers that you're breaking, all the schemes that you break in a situation where you're crying with your student in an interview for a research project. And so I think the whole process was incredibly beautiful and just a gift for us. And so I can give you that example. I don't know if you can think of any other example, Grace, that comes to mind.
I think our record for quickest cry was about 5 minutes into one interview, and the interview person we were interviewing started crying, and it was very quick. But it was good. I think it was a sign that there was something that we were doing, that we were talking about something that needed to be said.
When you were researching and in the process of writing this, did you have kind of a preconceived idea of what you wanted to get out there in the community, or did it kind of evolve?
I would say both. Um, the preconceived idea for me was after the training, the leadership training, realizing I'm not alone and that not every woman has the opportunity to be in a space where they can find their tribe and realize they're not alone. And so I wanted to collect these stories so people that don't go to the training can hear those voices, can hear those stories. So that was the kind of the preconceived, I guess, plan. I didn't realize, or maybe what wasn't planned, was that it was going to have such a big impact. We've presented the work to several audiences, and not just moms, but siblings and educators and other members in the community are seem heavily impacted by the stories, and they seem to care. And I thought I was just going to care about this. And it was clear to me after all these presentations that we've done that it's relevant for more than just the moms.
And Grace, with your lived experience, how did it affect you personally?
Um, it was interesting to hear the maternal perspective, the kind of parental perspective. And we did ask them in the interviews about parenting and their siblings. And so it was interesting to hear how they responded to those questions and whether or not they considered what is called glass child syndrome, the experience of the siblings. And so that was fascinating to kind of see a little window into kind of something I've been seeing on the outside, but never quite having the opportunity to look at it from the inside.
Can you explain for our listeners that might not know what glass child means?
Yeah, glass child syndrome describes the relationship between parents and their non-disabled siblings, specifically between those two parts of the family. And it's often shown in children who have siblings with disabilities. They have higher levels of maturity, hyper independence. They tend to be kind of a golden child, but they often feel the term comes from the fact that their needs are often looked through rather than looked at, and that's why they're glass children. So how they learn to be self-sufficient to decrease their burden on the family.
Kind of like so much of the family's emotional and physical resources are spent on the child with disabilities that the other children just kind of have to survive in it. Is that kind of
Yeah.
they kind of get overlooked almost or looked through?
I one person I talked to described it as being a Roomba, how they kind of
I love
get
that.
set out into the world and they like will clean up and do their little chores, but they don't, their parents don't bear them much mind.
You actually used a metaphor in the foreword to the book. Anita, I think you called the moms superheroes. And then you kind of talked about the glass child syndrome as being kind of the Robin character in the Batman and Robin scenario. And I thought that was so incredibly interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because when you think about that old TV show and you think about that dynamic duo of Batman and Robin, right? Going out there and solving the world's problems. Um, Robin is always kind of off to the side, right? He's never the true star, but could any foil be, or any villain be foiled if it weren't for the assistance of Robin? And I thought that that was so incredibly powerful. Um, because as a parent myself with children and a child who is disabled and one who isn't, I can tell you I couldn't do it without my daughter's assistance, right? However, I know while it's all going on, it's not fair, it's not equal, right? But yet I'm still having to demand those things from my child. So I thought that that metaphor itself and that kind of analogy was so wonderful when reading the foreword.
Hmm.
So you talk a lot about invisible battles that are faced by the moms of disabled children that you document in the book. What were some of the most common invisible battles that were faced by these moms?
Mhm.
Definitely the IEP meetings, dealing with schools, how often you have to learn how to play the game and how to manipulate the game in order to get what your child needs. Because ultimately the school system isn't your friend per se. They've got different goals than you do. And so that's like always a big struggle is learning that you have to, you can't assume they have your best interest at heart.
I would add that depending on the severity of of the disability, a lot of struggles in the medical system too. And I would summarize it not being believed by doctors, or the doctors not trusting the mother's lived experience with the child, and their like experiential knowledge of who this child is. And like when the moms try to convey this information to the medical doctors, they struggle to be listened to. And so there's a lot of time wasting, finding new doctors, and another doctor, because they're not listened to for the most part. It's a struggle to find a provider that listens to that lived experience that the mom brings to the table.
So I agree. Those are definitely two of the systemic issues that I see that create big barriers in the disability community. How did these systemic issues, whether it's insurance or healthcare or education, how do you think they impacted or influenced the advocacy journeys of these moms, or moved them from, say, perhaps their kind of internal self-focused circle to having a bigger sphere of community influence?
I would say that like Julie Beckett, would say, and this is something that was brought up at the training, when she did everything to help her daughter Katie get help or get care at home covered by Medicaid dollars. She said it. She said, "I was just a mom doing the next thing." The next thing is a conversation that we had with Diane Brenneman, because we would confuse her phrase with the right thing. And it was actually the next thing, because Julie didn't know what the right thing was. But as a mom, you can't give up. You have no choice. And so this is a conversation we had with all the moms. And I think it was a consensus that none of them felt they had a choice not to do something. And so like facing these problems and trying to help their child was something that was out of the question. And so they just did the next thing. And if that didn't work, they went on to the next thing. And that was in all spheres of influence, whether it was the education system or the medical system, or correcting, people in the community about, wrong ideas about disability, whatever it may be. They just, didn't feel they had a choice not to do something. And that was very inspiring.
Were there particular stories or moments during the research that surprised you or moved you more than what you expected? Because obviously you were somewhat familiar with some of these stories, having these people be alumni from the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute.
Okay, so I'm going to speak as a foreigner here. As a foreigner, I'm from Chile, right? And so when you're a foreigner, you grow up obviously in a different country, and there's always an image about the United States that's projected abroad, and an image that's projected about about the United States abroad a lot is the prevalence of individualism. And so one thing that surprised me, knowing these moms from Iowa, was how they were all the opposite of individualism. That kind of stereotypical image that I received growing up and before moving to the United States of people don't have community here, people are individualists, consumerists. And here I meet these moms in Iowa that are behaving nothing like the stereotypical image that I had grown to believe in. And so for me, that was like a kind of like a wake-up call of the power of prejudice, the power of stereotypes. And this woman corrected my misconception of the kinds of things that people do here to build community, to get, to engage in collective action and to engage in advancing collective rights and not just individualism. And so I would say that was the most surprising and moving thing in my journey that was not related per se to disability, but to humanizing people in this country that I had, kind of almost relied on these stereotypes that are really strong. And so I don't know if you want to add something to that, Grace.
Yeah, for me, what surprised me the most was people's reaction to finding out what the research we were doing was on. Because like while I realized that there's in all the interviews they talk about this need for community, and then when I would go out into the community, I would go to, get lunch or whatever, and I would say what I've been working on. And the people would start telling me all about their own personal experiences with disabilities. Or when anytime we presented our research at a conference or whatever, people come up afterwards and tell me their stories and they start telling us their stories. And I hadn't realized just how widespread this sort of starvation for community and for connection was until I started talking about it and opening doors for people to say things that they hadn't ever said before.
I think it's oftentimes so easy to feel alone, especially when you have a child that has a unique disorder or one that isn't well known or that's just challenging to deal with in the community. Oftentimes I think people feel isolated. So I'm really glad to hear, Anita, that you found that sense of community. I mean, that's incredible, and it's a really unique perspective.
I think what you're also talking about, community and then access, right? Breaking down some of the stereotypes that people have, whether it's stereotypes of somebody growing up outside of the US or somebody who has never experienced disability firsthand. I know that was my own experience until my son became disabled, right? I lived in sweet, blissful ignorance and had no idea that there was this whole other community out there. And I think what we're really talking about is access, right? Access to information, access to healthcare, access to support systems. So as we talk about access, how do race and class or even urban versus rural settings factor into the experiences of advocacy in Iowa?
That's a big question. We could talk the entire program about that one. But I have like some examples from the research itself and some also personal examples. So one example in the research that, has to do with ethnicity was one of the participants was foreign. And they didn't speak a word of English when they were in the process of receiving diagnosis. And what they got was a stack of papers in a foreign language. And that prompted them to learn English. And so that has to do with access. So how do we not have bilingual at the very minimum, Spanish and English, when Spanish, I think, is the second most spoken language in the United States, right? And so that was one concrete example of how ethnicity and the language can affect the disability experience differently. In my case, as a foreigner, I don't have extended family here. And so all the experience of a family that's a nuclear family without grandparents, without aunts, without cousins, without the people that you rely on for emergency situations, and disability is kind of like an ongoing emergency, right? You're always in the emergency situation. And so, of course, when you don't have extended family, you can see how much of a blessing it is, especially in these rural communities. I've observed like family is really important, and like just being able to appreciate how important that is from the perspective of someone that doesn't get to have family here, And so that would be another aspect of the rural, urban, or foreign, local. But we also had a conversation. I think, Grace, maybe you remember more. We had a conversation in a conference we went about the differences between rural, urban environments. And so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, in that conference, we came across the term metronormativity, which comes from queer theory and the idea of homo urbanus. But Metronormativity is the assumption and the urban-centric bias that research and typically there's this perspective that only important things happen in urban areas, and so rural areas often get overlooked despite 32 or so percent of the population in America living in rural areas. And so there's a lot of focus on urban areas and urban access, which does tie into like low income type stuff, but there's being in a rural area is different. Access to healthcare is different. You have to travel much further to get some of the stuff. Some of the people that we interviewed talked about how they had to cross state lines and travel 2-3 hours to get medical help, and how, when you spread things out, the access becomes less and less. And when funding cuts happen, it's those rural areas that go first. And so kind of learning to correct the bias of thinking that the rural doesn't matter, which we work on a little bit, but.
If you're just turning in, you're listening to I Am Able Iowa, and we're talking with our guests, Anita and Grace, who are co-authors of the book Invisible Battles, Invisible Battles Faced by Moms of Disabled Children in Iowa. And everything you're saying, I just find so incredibly interesting. And I love this anthropological lens that you put on everything, because I think that this is such an emotional, personal topic that it would be easy, not easy, or some folks might tend to be dismissive of the actual research part of what it is that you're doing. Anita, you talked a little bit about the fruition or the development of this idea and how it came from your participation in the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute. So can you just talk a little bit more about how that your participation impacted your academic perspective on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that anthropologists are trained to do methodologically is to be good listeners and listen to people's stories. So lived experience is crucial. You engage in participant observation. You are doing long-term field work to, have a deep immersion in communities to learn about them. And so I felt that this wasn't any different than me going to a community, that I was going to study. And what impacted me the most in the IFLTI, more than the PowerPoint presentations, more than anything else, were the stories of other moms, whether it was informal, kind of in the hallway after our, chatting with the moms that went, to something that they did called the panel of family experts, where I think you and other moms told your stories. Mm-hmm. And so as an anthropologist, I value, the power of storytelling. And I think that in this case, I didn't realize immediately, but when I was 1 year out of the program and my initial project had failed, I kind of came to the realization that what I needed to do was to go back and systematize those stories that had impacted me so much and had given me a sense of community, had given me hope, had taught me that, America is not just about individualism, had corrected so much misconceptions I had going on. And so I felt that in this case, the storytelling component was crucial because that's what the moms taught us. Really all the changes that happened, or a lot of the changes that happened, came from someone being able to break somebody else's heart. A politician, like getting to the heart of a politician, which is a great feat. And so that is not really done. And I have respect for numbers, don't get me wrong here, but that's not solely accomplished with numbers alone. And so for me, it felt really important to document these stories and make sure that more people had access to them. And it's access to, question of access also.
I honestly can't think of a better time than right now to have a book like this available. It just, over the last 10 years or so, it was really difficult to engage people in advocacy because so many changes had happened, with education and with access and those kind of things. And maybe everything wasn't perfect for people with disabilities, but at least it was a really good foundation in a place where we can all have a path. And that has kind of been forgotten. And so advocacy and understanding these invisible stories is so critical right now because the platform is really shifting and it's not in a direction that is supportive of families and individuals with disabilities.
I think you're spot on, Doug. I mean, when we are working with families and we're trying to evoke change, we oftentimes coach them to avoid the statistics and the numbers and to connect with your legislator or your elected official on that individual personal level. And I think that's something that participation in the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute really helps prepare you for. Whether it's you're presenting to the panel of family experts or you're presenting in your cohort, they really do help you find out how to more critically analyze your own personal story in order to eliminate the stuff that's not necessary and have the biggest impact to be able to evoke change. However, one of the things that I didn't really see in my cohort, and perhaps you didn't either, Anita, were a lot of the siblings or the self-advocates that were participants. And the cohort I participated in, there were no men. It was all moms. And so when you were crafting this book, I was very interested in this other part, right? Because none of this can happen in isolation. These moms aren't doing this by themselves. They have this cast of characters, oftentimes, whether it's extended family, spouses, other children, that are helping them to be successful. And so I just think that's so incredibly interesting. Grace, what have you learned from this project that shaped your understanding of siblinghood and caregiving? I mean, you're young. You don't have children yet.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting for my senior paper for Luther College. I interviewed siblings and there's a lot of variety. In my opinion, a bit harder to talk to siblings and ask them questions and generate conversation in the sense that there's such a wide variety of experiences depending on disability and birth order. But across the board, I found it so fascinating how they were very uncomfortable when it came to talking about caregiving and the role they played in caregiving. They would talk about anything else. But the second I approached that topic, they would kind of shut down, or they would say no, they didn't have to, but they felt like no one was forcing them to do it, but they never felt like they could say no. And so coming across a lot of that type of stuff was really interesting, and to be able to see what experiences that I had growing up aren't all that strange, that there is this commonality of experiences that happen to people. And that was kind of nice. That my own seeking of community was interesting.
What would be, I so identify with everything you're saying, right? My daughter, she's 12 and a half. And I remember very early on, I think maybe she would be 4. And I remember saying to her, okay, mommy needs you to babysit Charlie so she can go potty. And we would call it babysitting, right? I just needed her to watch him so I could run to the restroom or so I could step away. And it was easy. Charlie was less than a year old and he was not mobile. But now when I'll say, hey, mommy needs your help, I know I can see it viscerally on her face. how, I don't want to say annoyed she is, but how she feels as though she has no option, right? That I'm putting her in this position. And so we are very cognizant as parents to not have her fulfill that caregiver role, right? We employ people. We're fortunate that now we have a Medicaid waiver. We're able to employ people to help us fulfill that task. But things happen, stuff comes up, and there are times when people aren't able to do their duty. And I need to run to the restroom because that's a natural bodily function. And I just, it's such an awkward topic, and caregiving comes with so many deeply personal and intimate moments that really put siblings, I think, in an unusual position when it comes to caregiving, in particular, if the person they're caregiving for is of an opposite gender and they require very personal caregiving duties like changing diapers, right? Assisting with feeding. Um, I can see how that would just cause my daughter to just shut down, right? She would do it because I asked her to do it, not because she wanted to do it, not because there was any sense of self pride when helping, but she would do it because she felt like she had no other option, that she had to do it, and that her own personal needs were being put second to those of her sibling. And so I just can really identify you, Grace, with you, Grace, when you speak. I'm very curious, were there moments where your academic framework and your personal experiences collided or complemented with each other in unexpected ways?
I mean, for me, it's hard to separate the two in anthropology because it requires so much reflexivity and it involves a lot of reciprocity with the people you do research with. And so it's really, really difficult to view anthropology, at least sociocultural anthropology, as something that you can, engage in a divorcing of the personal and the research. At least for me, it's never been a possibility. And so I wasn't I don't think I would ever engage in a research project that didn't affect me or impact me personally in one way or another. Obviously, there are some research projects that are going to be more personal than others, but they have to engage me personally to some extent. Otherwise, how am I going to have the drive and the energy to invest the immense amount of time and effort that it requires to do research thoroughly if I don't really think it affects me in any way or form? And so for me, it wasn't really surprising, but we did make a decision to intentionally minimize or even just eliminate almost entirely any theory, because as an academic, you're usually invited to have a theoretical framework, to analyze what you gather, the data you gather. And we felt that the stories spoke for themselves. We didn't need to interpret the words of the moms. They were all very good storytellers, number one, and they knew exactly, what was going on. And they were, clearly seeing society and what was going on, and what barriers they were facing, both structurally and at a more personal level. So it felt unnecessary to distract the reader with abstractions when the moms did such a good job in, conveying and the emotional force, of the experience that they were communicating to us. So I don't know if you want to add something, Grace.
There was, during my senior project when I was working on that, I was sitting in my room staring out. I had a corner room, so I had two windows, and it was family weekend. And so I was watching all the families and their kids walking around campus doing that thing. And I was feeling a bit bummed, a bit sorry for myself because my father obviously couldn't come do that type of stuff, and the campus isn't accessible for people in wheelchairs. And so I was feeling, bummed sitting up there like, oh, look at what I don't have. And then I thought to myself, oh, this is data. I'm going to take notes. And so I had like this little out of body experience where I was like, I'm going to study myself real quick. And I just wrote about what I was feeling and what kind of making connections to my research. And I was like, look at me go.
What a healthy way to pull yourself out of a bummer, huh? That's awesome. As readers pick up your book, Invisible Battles of Ordinary Moms, what do you hope they get out of it? Being a research-based book, this is an important book for policymakers to read, for educators, families. What do you want them to get?
I hope people with experience, like who are like ourselves, get a bit of that catharsis that we felt during the research project, feeling a bit of that, oh, maybe I'm not alone and maybe I'm not crazy, that there are other things going on and there are other people pushing for change and that, you're not alone.
I would add that they restore hope, that there are things that can be done. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. That they see that there are other moms out there, even in situations that might be much more extreme than their own, and have managed to forge ahead and help their child and help their community. That people in power realize that people with no power did great things. So it's no excuse. They have no excuse to do nothing. If the moms, that had no influence, no power, they were just moms trying to do the next thing, accomplished great things. And so there's also, and I think you said this, Nancy, in one of our conversations, that the book condenses almost 500 years worth of experience and ideas. If you add up all the ages of all the moms and you stack them, you have 500 years of experience of people, throwing out ideas of what they did, what worked, what didn't, and what better place to find that than other people that are going through similar problems and that you trust, because they know what they're talking about.
Oh, there's nothing better than the suggestion from a vetted parent, right? Somebody who's been through that experience, and their lived experience means so much. One of the things that you said, both of you talked about crying and crying and crying. And I had the privilege of watching you present your project up at Luther College. And you had your artistic collaborator that was also there with you. I believe her name is Gray. And Gray was talking a lot about choosing the artwork for the book and just so much of kind of wanting to move away from what you might expect, right? The stereotype that these are all sad stories, that while you're crying with these people and they're sharing their stories, that these are tears of sadness. But what I took away from your presentation, and even as I talk to you here today, is that the tears that you shed in your catharsis weren't necessarily tears of grief, although grief is in these stories, right? Mourning is in these stories. There are moments of true sadness, like when Dawn's daughter dies, or trying to tear down these institutional barriers. But the theme that I kept coming back to over and over again is the theme of hope. So can you talk a little bit about the theme of hope that is woven through these tales?
Hope is incredibly important, I think, especially when you have to climb Mount Everest over and over. And one thing that we learned from our artist collaborator, Greg Pitzenberger, was when we were discussing ideas for illustrations for the book. I was almost an art major, so I always had this feeling that we needed images to go along with the stories, and so I I had a conversation with Grace and said, "Hey, we need to recruit an artist." And when we eventually recruited the artist, and they agreed to work with us, and they did these stories, they listened to the audio. And of course, it was a lot of grief and a lot of sad things, but there were also moments of joy and battles that had been won. And so they advocated and argued that we needed to juxtapose all the chapters with images that were bright and hopeful. And I think that was something that at the time of the conversation didn't really I didn't realize how important it was, because it's true. As you rightly point out, the stories have all the spectrum of what it means to be human. And when we're people, we cry and we laugh. We have hopes and fears. We have successes and failures, and we can't erase one with the other. Everything needs to be there, so it's truthful to what it means to be human. And so I would say that I was very happy with having those illustrations as a reminder of the importance of hope. And this is why I said, in response to the question about what I hope people to get out of the book, I hope that they recover hope if they lost it, and that they remain hopeful if they still have it. So they don't give up.
I love all of that. As a result of all your research and writing this book, where do you feel like advocacy needs to go in our communities?
One thing that they stressed at the IO Family Leadership Training Institute was this idea about circles. So the family circle, the community circle, the policy circle. And I think that at some points in our existence, we might not be able to influence, Washington, D.C., but we can influence our immediate circle of influence. So to give you an example, I'm a college professor, and I have, a circle of influence that I can tap into. I can possibly shift the culture or the attitudes that my colleagues have towards disability. And so one thing I did last year was, through funding from the College Center for Teaching and Excellence, put together a proposal for a faculty learning community for supporting neurodiverse students. I don't have to do it. I absolutely don't have to do it. I'm not going to lose my job if I don't do it. I just have to go and teach. But I felt the need, to raise awareness, because I started hearing stories from students about, maybe not being believed, or not being, maybe supported in the way they felt, they needed to be by, people that work at the university. And so we can always do something in our spaces that we have access to influence. We don't have to do it. But when you become a leader, when you get that seed planted in you, it's absolutely impossible not to be looking for where you can make some change, even if it's not, at top levels. I think we can always make change, even if it's in the very local, small sphere of influence that is available to us. And so if we don't forget that, I think like the little things that everyone does all add up to bigger changes. So that's something that I would say. Even if you feel powerless, even if you feel that you don't have a sphere of influence, you actually do. You just haven't looked hard enough.
Yeah, it's just like pick one small thing and see if you can get that change. You can't overthrow the system in one night. Rome, all that jazz. But go around your town, hit all of the little the like mechanical doors, and make note of all the ones that are broken. Check your building at work, see if all their handicap doors work. It's small little things, and it may feel silly or you may feel like you're not actually doing anything because it's so small, but I think it's important that you're just showing up to begin with.
I'm reminded all the time with Julie Beckett, and she was a teacher and a mom, and she really just educated our leaders based on what was happening in her life at that moment. And that was helping to get her daughter to be able to live at home rather than in a hospital. We just have a few minutes left. How can listeners find your book and read it?
That's the next steps we find ourselves in. As you know, if you've published a book, you need to submit a book prospectus to a publisher. So I'm doing this backwards. In the past, with my other academic research, I've written the prospectus, gotten accepted by a publisher, and then written the book. This time we wrote the book, and now we're submitting the prospectus. So we've identified a publisher that looks really promising, that has a disability studies acquisition editor. And the plan that we have with Grace is to submit this prospectus by the end of the summer at the latest. So in the next month or two. And if that publisher says no, then we'll do the next thing and find another one.
Right. The next thing.
Until we find like a home for the book. But I am very hopeful that the stories are so impactful that a publisher would be silly, to let it go. So we'll find someone.
I would agree. There are 8 captivating stories of mothers sharing their battle. So as we proceed into closing the show, what message would you like to leave with families, especially those mothers who may see themselves in the moms that you featured in the book, who are in the midst of their own invisible battles that are going on right now? What would you tell them?
I would tell them I'm proud of them.
How about you, Grace?
I would give them something, well, the advice that I've been cooking with my senior paper, because I'm often approached with how do I fix my non-disabled child? How do I prevent this glass child syndrome? And you just gotta be transparent and be open. And when you do give them attention, give them undivided attention, which can come in the odd shape of don't mention their sibling. If you mention their sibling, it shows that they don't have your full attention, that there still is their sibling occupying this invisible space. So giving your child, it doesn't even have to be, it's not about quantity of time, it's about quality of attention and making sure that you take the time to look at your other child who doesn't have a disability and showing that you do see them and that you do care about them.
Kind of adding on to that, my Grace taught me, to see an issue that I was not seeing because I have another son without a disability. He's younger. And one day, I talked to him about this openly, and he really appreciated that I brought it up openly, frankly. And he did tell me, it's not that you don't give me attention, Mom, but you give him laser attention. I want some of that. So give your children that are non-disabled some laser attention too. They really deserve it. They've worked hard. And so, we do our best as parents. And I think this is good advice that Grace is giving the parents that worry about all their children, because we ultimately love all our children with or without disability. So
Thank you for talking with us today.
thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being on the show today. This is KHOI Story City Ames, and you've been listening to I Am Able Iowa. I Am Able Iowa airs the first and last Saturday morning of each month at 9 a.m. on KHOI 89.1 FM. You can also hear us streaming live online at khoifm.org. We invite you to share your comments, questions, and program ideas with us at doug@thearcofiowa.org. And if you visit www.thearcofiowa.org, you'll find previous episodes and more information about our program. I Am Able Iowa is produced by the Arc of Iowa, headquartered in West Des Moines, Iowa, with local chapters here in Ames and across the state of Iowa. Thank you for listening, and until the next time, this is Nancy Baker Curtis and Doug Cunningham saying, You are able, Iowa.